has a podcast. Talk about it, think about it, discuss it. That's a podcast.
All right, ready to dive deep. Today it's information networks, and we've got Yuval Noah Harari's Nexus as our guide.
Ooh, excellent choice. Nexus is a real mind bender.
It is. We're going to look at how these networks have shaped history, how they function, and what all of that means for us now.
Especially with AI becoming such a big player. Yeah, lots to unpack there.
Definitely. So where do we even begin with something as complex as information networks?
Well, Harari actually starts with a really thought-provoking idea about information itself.
Okay, lay it on me.
He says it's not just about facts, true or false. It's about the connections we make, the links that create realities, even if those connections are based on things that aren't true.
Interesting. So like even something's factually wrong, it can still have a real impact if enough people believe it and connect over it.
Exactly. It's about how information brings things together, forms networks, even if the foundation is a little shaky.
That makes me think about astrology.
Perfect example. I mean, it's not exactly scientifically sound, right?
Not really, no.
But it's created these huge social networks for centuries, people bonding over their star signs, even if the basis is questionable.
It's the shared belief that matters, the connection it creates.
Right. And Harari takes this even further. He compares stories to DNA.
Wait, stories are like DNA? How does that work?
It's a brilliant analogy when you think about it. DNA holds the instructions for building an organism, right? This super complex network of cells.
Yeah, the blueprint for life.
Exactly. And stories, in a similar way, provide a blueprint for cultures, religions, even whole nations.
So they're the building blocks of shared identities, of how we see ourselves in the world around us.
Precisely. They give us this framework to understand things, a sense of belonging, even a purpose. Just like DNA gives structure to a living being.
And is that what sets us apart as humans? Our ability to tell and believe in stories?
Harari argues that it's a major factor in our success as a species. Our ability to create and share these narratives allowed us to cooperate in larger groups, beyond just family ties.
I see. So instead of just relying on instinct or genetic relationships, we could connect through these shared stories.
Right. Gave us a huge evolutionary advantage. Think about it.
Yeah.
Religions, nations, even the brands we see every day, they're all built on these shared stories.
It's all about the narrative, creating that sense of belonging, a shared identity.
Exactly. And it's not just about the facts of the story. It's the emotions they evoke, the values they embody, the connections they forge.
It's like the story itself becomes more important than the individual events or people it's based on.
Harari makes this point about Jesus.
Oh.
He says the story of Jesus has had a far bigger impact than the person himself.
That's fascinating.
The person, Jesus, lived in a specific time and place. But the story, through word of mouth, writings, art, it's reached billions across time and space.
So the story takes on a life of its own, shaping history in ways the actual person might never have imagined.
Exactly. It shows the power of these information networks, how they can amplify and spread ideas far beyond their origins.
Okay, so we've got stories shaping our reality, creating these networks of meaning. But what about systems that try to organize information in a more structured way, like bureaucracy? Where does that fit in?
Bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Well, that's where Harari takes us in a different but equally interesting direction. He argues that bureaucracy, while necessary for creating order, often struggles to represent the messy reality of the world accurately.
Is that because it relies so much on simplifying things, putting them into neat categories?
Exactly. Think about filing cabinets, forms, all those tools. They impose this rigid structure on a world that's full of nuance and complexity.
So trying to force everything into those neat boxes can sometimes distort the truth?
It can. And Harari gives this chilling example of how bureaucratic hurdles actually dispossessed many Romanian Jews in the 1930s.
Oh, wow.
They couldn't navigate this complex system designed to exclude them. Tragic consequences because the system wasn't built to reflect their reality.
It's a reminder that systems designed for order can be manipulated to create injustice, even unintentionally.
Definitely a powerful insight. And this tension between order and truth doesn't just disappear with technology. The invention of the printing press, while groundbreaking, brought its own set of challenges.
But wasn't the printing press a huge step forward for spreading information and knowledge?
Oh, absolutely. It was a game changer. But along with democratizing information, it also made it easier to spread misinformation.
So more information doesn't automatically equal more truth?
Unfortunately, no. And we have a dramatic historical example with The Hammer of Witches.
That title sounds ominous.
It was a bestseller that fueled witch hunts across Europe. The scary part. Its claims were totally false.
So even with wider access to information, thanks to the printing press, dangerous stories could still spread and have a huge impact.
Exactly. It shows how the power of stories, even false ones, can be amplified by these information networks.
All right, so thinking about systems like democracy, how do they navigate this balance between truth and order? Don't they need accurate information to function properly?
Absolutely. Harari makes a key point. Successful information networks need to do two things: uncover the truth and establish social order. A tricky balance, for sure.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is. And he uses the U.S. Constitution as an example. It's a story that provides order, the framework for a nation, but it also has this built-in mechanism for self-correction.
You mean the amendments?
Exactly. It allows the Constitution to adapt and evolve, unlike texts that claim to be unchanging or infallible.
So it's a system that acknowledges the need for both order and the possibility of needing to course correct as we learn more.
Right. It recognizes the truth can evolve, and our systems need to be flexible enough to keep up.
Which brings us to the modern era. Mass media, the internet, and now AI. How are they impacting this dance between truth and order?
This is where Harari's analysis gets really relevant to our lives today. He points out that mass media, while crucial for large-scale democracy, also introduced new ways to manipulate and control information.
Like propaganda.
Exactly. Think about totalitarian regimes like Stalin's USSR. They used mass media for propaganda and surveillance on a scale never seen before.
Scary stuff. And now we've got AI adding a whole other layer of complexity.
AI can create content, manipulate emotions, and even make decisions, often in ways we don't fully understand yet.
So it's like all the challenges we've talked about, but amplified.
Right. It raises big questions about who controls the narrative in this new information landscape.
This leads us to one of Harari's most thought-provoking warnings, the Silicon Curtain. What's that all about?
He argues that a new division is emerging, and it's not between countries, but between humans and AI.
Instead of the Iron Curtain, we might be facing a Silicon Curtain.
That's the idea. AI could become so powerful, so complex, that it effectively separates us from the decisions that shape our lives.
So we're creating a system that could ultimately leave us in the dark.
It's a possibility we need to consider. It highlights the urgency of addressing the ethical and political challenges AI poses.
We can't just assume it's all going to work out for the best.
We have to be proactive, ensure AI serves humanity, and doesn't erode those values democracies are built on.
Especially with this growing concern about algorithmic bias.
Absolutely. Algorithms learn from data, right? But that data often reflects our own biases, which can lead to unfair outcomes.
It's like those social media algorithms that seem to amplify outrage and division.
Exactly. They create feedback loops that reinforce those biases, even without being explicitly programmed to do so.
So what can we do about all this? It feels like a lot to grapple with.
It is, but we're not powerless. Harari emphasizes the need for regulation, decentralization, and transparency in AI development.
Those seem like good starting points, but how do you regulate something as complex and rapidly changing as AI?
It's a massive challenge, no doubt. But Harari argues that building AI isn't just about creating another tool, it's like unleashing a new kind of agent into the world.
An agent with its own ability to learn, adapt, make decisions. That's a pretty mind-blowing thought.
It is. And it means we need new frameworks for understanding and governing this emerging reality. We're not just dealing with bits and bytes anymore, are we?
Definitely not. It's about power, control, even the future of humanity itself. That's a pretty heavy realization.
It is. And it's a conversation we need to be having right now, before it's too late.
We've covered a lot of ground, from the power of stories to the challenges of bureaucracy, the rise of mass media, and now the emergence of AI. It seems like information networks have always been shaping our world, but the stakes are higher than ever.
They absolutely are. And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore some specific ways AI is impacting those networks today. We'll look at how algorithms are shaping our online experiences, how they're being used for surveillance and control, and how they're changing the very nature of truth itself.
It's a lot to take in, but understanding these dynamics is key if we want to navigate the world we're living in and the one we're creating.
Exactly. So take a moment to process what we've talked about, and we'll pick up the thread in part 2 of our deep dive.
It's going to be a fascinating one, so make sure you tune in.
Welcome back to our deep dive.
We've been setting the stage, looking at the big picture of information networks. Now let's zoom in on AI and how it's changing the game right now.
One of the most significant shifts is AI as a content creator. This is huge.
We're not just talking about algorithms sorting through stuff humans have made, right? This is different.
Totally different. We're talking about AI actually generating the content itself. Text, images, even music and videos. And it's getting hard to tell the difference.
Like those deepfake videos, those are getting crazy realistic.
Exactly. And that's where the whole issue of trust and credibility comes in.
Yeah, if we can't even tell what's real anymore, how can we possibly make informed decisions? It's like a recipe for chaos.
And then there's the question of accountability. If an AI creates something harmful, who's to blame? The programmer. The company that owns it. It gets complicated fast.
No easy answers there. And it's not just deepfakes. It's everything. News articles, marketing copy, social media posts. AI could be churning out tons of content.
And not all of it good. Imagine AI flooding the internet with propaganda or misinformation.
It's like a dystopian sci-fi movie come to life. A world where we're constantly being manipulated by AI-generated content.
And it might be closer than we think. Harari argues that AI is already shaping our online experiences in profound ways.
Like those personalized recommendations we see everywhere.
Exactly. Those are all driven by algorithms that are learning from our data, constantly adapting.
But isn't that creating these filter bubbles, where we're only exposed to information that confirms our existing beliefs?
That's the danger. We end up in these echo chambers, less likely to encounter different viewpoints or challenge our own assumptions.
Which leads to less critical thinking and more polarization. Not a great combination.
Not at all. And this brings us to another area where AI is having a huge impact: surveillance.
Surveillance. Okay, yeah, that's been in the news a lot lately.
AI is taking surveillance to a whole new level. Facial recognition systems, tracking our movements, even predicting our behavior.
It's like Big Brother on steroids. Kind of creepy, honestly.
It is. And it's not just governments doing this. Private companies are collecting tons of data about our online and offline activities.
Everything we do is being tracked and analyzed. Our purchases, our browsing history, even our location data.
Harari argues that we're moving toward a world of total surveillance, where our every move is monitored and recorded.
That's a pretty scary thought. What happens to privacy and freedom in that kind of world?
That's the big question. And then there's the potential for abuse.
Right. If that data falls into the wrong hands, it could be used to manipulate or control people.
Harari brings up China's social credit system as an example. It's a system that assigns citizens a score based on their behavior.
I've heard about that. It's like a real-life episode of Black Mirror.
That score can affect their access to loans, jobs, even travel permits.
It's a chilling example of how AI can be used to enforce conformity and silence dissent. It feels like something out of a dystopian novel.
It does. And while that's happening in China, these technologies are being developed and used elsewhere too.
It's a reminder that we need to be incredibly vigilant about protecting our freedoms, no matter where we live.
It's a global issue, for sure. But it's not just about surveillance and privacy. AI is also impacting the very idea of truth.
Oh, right. We talked about deepfakes earlier, but it goes way beyond that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. AI can manipulate data, generate fake evidence, create entire narratives that are incredibly convincing, even if they're completely fabricated.
So it's becoming even harder to distinguish between fact and fiction.
Exactly. It undermines our ability to trust information, to make informed decisions. It shakes the foundation of how we understand the world.
Harari calls this the post-truth era, where objective reality is constantly being challenged and subjective interpretations rule the day.
It's a world where truth becomes whatever you can convince people to believe, regardless of the facts.
And in that kind of world, whoever controls the AI, whoever controls the algorithms, has a lot of power.
An incredible amount of power. They can shape public opinion, influence elections, maybe even rewrite history. It's a sobering thought.
It definitely makes you realize how important critical thinking and media literacy are. We can't just take everything we see and hear at face value.
Especially in this age of AI-generated content. We need to be skeptical, ask questions, and look for evidence. Don't just blindly trust information, especially when it comes from sources that are opaque or have something to gain.
It's about being an active participant in the information landscape, not a passive consumer.
Exactly. And that's where Harari's insights are so valuable. He's not just warning us about the dangers of AI, he's also challenging us to think about the kind of future we want to create.
To be more conscious and intentional about how we develop and use this technology.
We're at a crossroads. We can choose to let AI control us, or we can choose to control AI.
And that choice is something we need to be thinking about right now. The future is literally in our hands. So we've talked about a lot of potential downsides when it comes to AI. It can feel kind of doom and gloom, to be honest.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to be concerned about. But Harari isn't all doom and gloom. He does offer some hope.
Okay, good. Because I was starting to get a little worried.
He's not saying we need to, reject technology altogether, go off the grid, that sort of thing.
So no need to ditch my smartphone and move to a cabin in the woods.
Not necessarily. His point is that we need to be more conscious, more ethical about how we develop and use AI.
Okay, so it's not the technology itself that's the problem, it's how we choose to use it.
Exactly. It's about shaping this technology to work for us, not against us. Which means we need to think about human values.
That makes sense. But how do you even begin to program human values into AI? That seems pretty complicated.
Well, Harari argues that it starts with understanding those values more deeply ourselves.
Like, we need to figure out what's important to us as humans before we can teach machines to value those same things.
Exactly. He says we need more research on things like consciousness, emotions, ethics, the stuff that makes us human.
So it's not just about building machines that can think, but machines that can, feel and understand what it means to be human.
Right. It's a more holistic approach to AI development, taking into account not just the technical stuff, but the social, psychological, even spiritual aspects.
That's pretty deep, but it does make sense. If we want AI to reflect our values, we need to be clear about what those values are in the first place.
Exactly. And along with figuring out our values, Harari also emphasizes the importance of regulation.
Regulation, yeah. That seems to be a big topic these days.
It's essential. We need clear guidelines and safeguards to make sure AI isn't used for harmful purposes. Can't just let it run wild.
Right, think about nuclear weapons or genetic engineering. We've learned that powerful technologies need some rules, some oversight.
Exactly. We can learn from how we've handled other powerful technologies in the past, adapt those models for AI.
So it's not about starting from scratch, but building on what we've already learned.
Right. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, just make sure the wheels are steering in the right direction.
Makes sense. Harari also talks about decentralization. What does that mean in the context of AI?
He's talking about avoiding too much power in the hands of a few big tech companies or governments. It's about breaking up monopolies and making the AI ecosystem more diverse and distributed.
So more players, more voices, less control concentrated in one place.
Exactly. If we spread out the development and control of AI, it's less likely to be manipulated or abused by any single entity.
It's like checks and balances, but for technology.
I like that. It's about creating a more resilient, adaptable AI landscape, one that's less vulnerable to being hijacked.
And this all ties into his point about transparency, right? If we're going to trust AI, we need to understand how it works.
Transparency is crucial. We need to know how these systems make decisions, what data they're using. You can't just be a black box where we put in stuff and get out results without knowing what happened in between.
It's like we need to see the recipe before we eat the meal, right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We need to be informed consumers of AI, just like we are with food or other products.
We want to know what we're getting into, make sure it aligns with our values.
Exactly. And that's where Harari's vision gets really interesting. It's not just about creating smarter machines, it's about creating a better future.
Using AI to solve problems, improve our lives, even expand our understanding of what it means to be human.
It's about seeing AI as a tool for good, for progress, for making the world a better place.
It's a pretty inspiring vision, but it also seems like a lot of work.
Oh, it definitely is. It's not going to happen overnight. But Harari argues that it's worth striving for.
It's a reminder that we have a choice in how this technology unfolds. We're not just passive bystanders.
Exactly. And this is where our listeners come in. It's a call to action.
So what can people do? Where do they even begin?
Start by educating yourself. Learn about AI, the good, the bad, the potential, the risks. Pay attention to how AI is being used in your life, in your community.
Don't just scroll mindlessly through your social media feed. Be aware of the algorithms at play.
Ask questions. Challenge assumptions. Demand transparency. If something feels off, speak up.
Engage in conversations about the ethics of AI. What kind of future do we want? Our voices matter.
They really do. The future of AI is not predetermined. It's being shaped right now, and we all have a role to play.
This deep dive has taken us on quite a journey. From the power of stories to the complexities of AI, it's been a lot to process.
But ultimately, it's been about understanding our own place in this information age. We're not just passive consumers, we're active participants.
And that's both a responsibility and an opportunity.
Exactly. So let's go out there and be informed, engaged, and ethical participants in this age of AI.
The future is in our hands. Let's shape it wisely.